Washington State has the 5th most expensive rents in the United States, about $2,300 a month, 5th highest in the country. Given that backdrop, Washington's legislators thought, you know what would be really good is to put legislation out there that's going to further shrink the supply of rental housing and make the affordability crisis even worse. And that's what we're doing. Let's get into it. Here we go. Let's watch a little video on this topic.
With signs in hand and a message heard from the Capitol steps.
6, 12, 17.
People dealing with sky-high housing costs are demanding a final bill allowing no more than a 7% yearly increase for renters and no more than 5% for those in manufactured homes.
This is what democracy looks like.
Claudia Francis,
if you're already struggling and you've got even a 5% increase per year, a couple $100, so every every couple of years you're going to have a $500 increase, $750. It's going to be $1,000 here in just a few years. So is this a win? I don't see this as being a big win. But I guess relative to some of the increases some of these folks have seen, and it's because you've put such a restriction on building. Democrat-run cities.
Would boost the state's rent increase cap to 10%.
I've had to move
and I feel terrible for all these people, but you know what I liken it to? It's like, okay, you've got the option of purchasing a Kia, and it costs XYZ. Or you've got the option of purchasing a Lamborghini, which costs XYZ. And you know what these costs are. These are not hard costs to figure out. It's just that Washington State is the Lamborghini and Texas, Florida are the Kias. So what can you afford? And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that. Well, I've lived here forever. Okay. What's your budget? What does that look like? Unfortunately, that's how the market goes. And any kind of dicking around that you do to the free market tends to have the opposite effect that Democrats want to see happen, that liberals want to see happen. And then, we'll go through 10 years of this and, we'll have a case study of, well, that legislation, that really put the whammy on rents. It really caused them to spike. Well, who saw that coming? Yeah. Nah, he won't.
Pension of $1,174.03 every month, and I cannot afford to keep moving.
Meanwhile, Sean Flynn with the Rental Housing Association of Washington is urging the governor to veto any version of this bill. He says any sort of rent cap could send housing providers running out of state.
I think for your average person, rent control sounds like a good idea, but the actual economic consequences are the opposite of what you think it would do. It leads to less housing.
But here's the thing: it's just
across the board.
It's not guaranteed in the state of Washington. You should have housing, but doesn't necessarily mean you can afford to live here. Period. It just doesn't, right? There's no guarantee. There are no guarantees. That's the way I look at it. So everybody's vulnerable. Just, your resources, where do they give you the most bang for your buck? And that's an accountability issue, isn't it? What's my budget? What can I afford? Where can I live? So this rent cap deal, it just got passed in the Washington legislature, and it's just waiting for the stroke of the pen by Governor Governor Bob, get out there and sign that bill. Title of today's story is Critics Worry That Newly Passed Rent Cap Bill Could Worsen Washington's housing crisis. I'm a real estate guy. I've been doing this for years, literally since high school. I started pulling comps in high school, got my real estate license, got my appraisal license, way back in the early 90s. Spent about 35 years as an appraiser. And anytime you do anything to shrink the supply of housing, guess what happens to your pricing and your rental pricing? They go up. They go up. You've got more people clamoring for it than supply. And we know that supply is an issue across the United States. It is. We just haven't built enough housing, and housing that can go to rental housing. You've got a lot of big construction companies not building rental housing right now because interest rates went up. Their costs are such, and you're not going to put money into a state that says, nope, you can only charge 5%. You can only charge 7% a year. I liken this whole thing to, if you're a big sports guy, the psychology of it is if you're playing basketball, don't miss. Don't ever focus on don't miss, because what you actually train yourself to do is think, miss, miss, miss. I liken this kind of thing to property owners and developers and apartment construction specialists, people who do that, to hearing rent cap, rent cap, rent cap, which means don't come here and build because we want to artificially put a cap on what the market dictates. We want to interfere, and developers are going to say, no, we don't want to do that. We're not going to focus on the don't miss, don't miss. We're going to focus on rent cap, rent cap, rent cap, meaning they're not going to build here, further constricting the supply. There you go. That's the basis for me. So it's an optics thing. It's not necessarily the 5%, 7%, 10%. It's not that. It's the fact that we are focusing now on making sure we get those rent increases every month. That's going to take rents even higher. And those who were considering investing in Washington State are now going to go, you know what? Tennessee's looking pretty good. You know what? Texas is looking pretty good. They don't have rent caps there. Let's go there. And that's what they're going to do to get their return, right? Controversial and hotly debated bill to cap rent increases in Washington State passed the legislature on Sunday, the last day of the 105-day session. The legislation now heads to Governor Bob Ferguson's desk for his signature. Bob, stroke it into law, right? Just stroke that pen, Bob. He's gonna. He's gonna. What's been interesting is Bob Ferguson was our attorney general for years. And he came on board, and a lot of us Republicans in the state are like, oh, man, we are in for a beatdown here. But a lot of what the media has covered is Republicans are liking what Bob Ferguson's doing, and Democrats aren't. And that flip-flop. Bob Ferguson's come in as kind of moderate, I dare say. Kind of moderate on some of this. So will he not sign this? No. This is one of those Democrat policies. It's just, this is the greatest thing ever. What could possibly go wrong? You go down those roads and you're like, all right, here's what's going to go wrong. After some back and forth between the two chambers, lawmakers passed engrossed House Bill 1217. This is an old bill, and they did basically, no, this isn't. That's another bill. We've had so many bills that are just like, what? You're doing what? Oh, okay. All right. It's Washington State. What do you expect? What I love is when folks get all worked up. They're just, can you believe this? Yeah, this is Washington State. It's as blue as it gets. What did you expect? I mean, I'm not going to get podcasts like this for years out of some boring, well-run Republican state. Not happening. So House Bill 1217 limits rent increases to 7% plus inflation, or 10%, whichever is lower. All right, so $22.95, 7%. What is that? A couple $100, 10%, $2,300, $230. So $200, $190. I could have done the math before this, but you know what I mean. Whichever is lower. Okay. And that's per year on an annual basis. So now landlords are going to go, all right, Let's take if the market will bear, let's take the maximum run because we don't know what the market's going to do next year. And Washington State has artificially already said, you can only do this much increase. I am a big believer in the free market, meaning supply demand kind of dictate where things are going. And I understand housing is incredibly expensive. It is. But it's expensive throughout the West Coast. The West Coast and the East Coast, the coasts, are really expensive places to live because you have constricted the supply even further than the national supply of just not having enough developers and builders out there since the Great Recession. Been a thing. The rent cap for manufactured and mobile homes is 5%. We don't have hardly any mobile homes here in Washington State. It's just not a thing. Our land pricing is too high. The economics of that don't work. You got to put a stick built on there because otherwise it just doesn't really work. Maybe in some of the really outer lying areas, you've still got manufactured homes, but throughout most of my career, I could count on, if I had 2 or 3 hands, on one hand, number of manufactured homes I've done as appraisals. Not wildly uncommon, but not very common either. Landlords could still set rent at whatever they please when a tenancy begins because there's no established start. Okay, you can't go past that because it's brand new, right? Bill proponents say it will give renters a degree of predictability in dealing with the high cost of living. All right, you've got really high rent. Now your rent's going to get higher by 7%. Enjoy that rent increase on a regular basis. Opponents of the bill contend it will hinder development and price landlords out of the business. Pricing landlords out of the business, I don't know if that's the right wording, but it gives them less incentive to come to Washington State and build the critical housing supply that we need, affordable housing supply that we need, so that rents actually do stabilize. You're never going to get rents to go down. This notion of if we build a lot of housing, then rents can come down. Not happening. You'll have ebbs and flows, but you're never going to have, all right, we're dumping 30% of supply into the marketplace and rents are going to come down by 15%. It's not happening. You got one way up. And that's how most of these big blue cities roll. And you've got some exceptions to that, but not much, and it usually has to do with industry, right? It's been a road for this piece of legislation, said Representative 𝗧𝗜𝗠𝗘𝗦𝗧𝗔𝗠𝗫 from Edmonds, said on the House floor Sunday. Incredibly proud of the work that's been done in this space to protect some of the most vulnerable Washingtonians. You want to say good job, but it's one of those policies that in the end, it's just going to smack those in the ass that can least afford to have that happen to them. Yeah, the folks at the lower socioeconomic end. This guarantees those rents are going to happen. This guarantees that those who were considering development in our state are going to go, you know what? 5%, 7%, 10% a month, that's not terrible. We can make those numbers work. But what else is Washington State going to do? We've already got a bunch of other Looney Tune legislation going on. And we've got some incredible stuff coming out of our legislature. When you get a bunch of Looney Tune Democrats and they've got a supermajority, that's what you get, right? Podcasts for days. Those that are struggling month to month to make ends meet will have the same monthly assurances that you and I have when it comes to paying our mortgage, unless you're on an ARM. You know what I mean? It's like these statements are but the same monthly assurances, you mean by every year, you're going to be looking down the barrel of a 7% rent increase. And that's compounded, right? So you add a couple $100 this year. Well, on top of that, so now we're at 23. We're at 25 times 10%. All right. Now you got a 250% increase, whatever those numbers are, 7%, whatever it is, right? Representative Michelle Chaldier, Republican from Gig Harbor, who sits behind Peterson, shook her head disapprovingly of his testimony. Sam Lowe, Republican, spoke against the bill. We all agree that people are struggling in this state right now, and we do know that rents are high. We need relief for those who are struggling, he said. You're not going to see any. There's not going to be any. Washington State is expensive. Seattle is expensive. If you need affordability, West Coast ain't your best coast, right? Just not. It's not going to be in the near future. It's not going to be in the distant future. It's just not going to be. The market dictates that this isn't an affordable area. Unfortunately, I believe this policy is not going to help. It's a risky proposition. Supply is the answer. We need more supply so people's rents can be lowered. Okay. So people's rents can be lowered. And in a state like Washington, what that equates to is rents going up at a lower pace. That's rents lowered. You're never going to see rents being lowered. You're just not. During the pandemic, my company, Summit Properties Northwest, we sold a ton of homes, and specifically, we sold quite a few, more than I can remember in recent years, of folks who had rental properties that were looking to get out of the rental property business because, number one, Seattle, I mean, just being a landlord in Seattle is a hard no-go for me because those people are literally Looney Tunes. You've got such advocates for tenants that why would you ever want to rent your house out in Seattle unless that's the business that you're in and you've got an attorney to basically back you up at every nook and cranny, because that is what happens in a big blue city is you've got these folks that just think landlords are the worst, tenants are the greatest, let's go down that road. And that's literally what Seattle is all about. Now we're looking at applying that to the whole state of Washington. The Senate passed version of the bill excluded single-family homes in the cap requirement. What was not included in the final version, don't really care. Landlords who do not follow the new law can be sued for damages by the tenant. Good luck with that. I mean, good luck going into court with that. The whole thing is just it's ridiculous. I see where they're starting off with this and they're thinking to themselves, this is going to be better. This is going to be better. And in reality, it's just not. It's just going to make an already expensive situation more expensive because at the very, very least, the optics are Seattle, Washington State, no longer friendly to big apartment developers. And that's what we need. We need big apartment developers to come in, get some dirt, put some cheap housing up, but it's not happening because you got so many layers upon layers upon layers of regulation and where you can build, and dirt is super expensive. Not happening. Representative Jeremy Dufault, our Republican from 𝗧𝗜𝗏, testified remotely Sunday after being banned from the House floor late last week. In our rural areas where we don't have this level of rent increases, now all of a sudden across our state, we're going to have almost every tenant seeing annual rent increases. That's what I kind of alluded to earlier. Now the focus is no longer on don't miss. It's on rent control. Rent control. Yeah, got to raise those rents. You got 7% I got to work with. Got to raise those rents. Dufault said, noting that that an amendment to the bill, which was rejected by majority party Democrats, would have allowed landlords who are already renting below fair market value to be exempt from the legislation. Rent control doesn't work, and it hasn't worked anywhere it's been imposed in the country. You know why rent control doesn't work? Because it's always enacted in areas that are run by Democrats. It's always enacted in high-density urban areas. And you've already got a situation where your supply is wildly outstripped by your demand. You got way too many people looking for housing. And then little things like, bringing 20 million illegals into the country who are competing for the same entry-level housing that those who are looking for affordable housing are. What do you think happened with those numbers? Yeah, affordable rent didn't go down. I'll give you that much. Study after study has shown that rent control both reduces the amount of units in the market and reduces the quality. I'm not so worried about quality. I'm worried about sheer numbers of supply. And you're just not going to have this. This is going to be a self-inflicted economic wound for the state of Washington. Yeah. This is Representative April Connors, Republican from Kennewick. She then read from a letter she was said provided one of the largest multifamily housing developers in the state. Should the legislature pass Bill 1217, we will immediately begin evaluating the feasibility of more than 2,000 new housing units that we have in various stages in Washington state, and will suspend nearly $500 million in investment in Washington state to begin reevaluating the financial viability and the feasibility for a reasonable rate of return for these projects under this law. Representative 𝗧𝗜𝗠𝗘𝗦𝗧𝗔, Democrat from Seattle, rose in support of the bill, saying that past racial housing policies necessitate the legislation. That is crap. That's crap, and we all know it. That's just some terrible thinking. But, whatever. Democrat from Seattle, not a shocker. Founding documents of our republic were designed in many ways to protect property holders, landowners, and people who were trafficking and enslaved people. Oh, you mean the cartels and the illegals coming into the United States now? Oh, you mean back then. So, and I know people have job constraints, and I know people have family constraints and a whole bunch of other stuff. But the bottom line is, you want to live in Washington state, you got to pay to play, and it is expensive. I mean, it's insanity. Bedrooms rent for $1,000, $1,200 a month. Bedrooms, single bedroom, shared bathroom, shared kitchen. That's pretty normal. West Coast, best coast. Guaranteed. Governor Bob Ferguson, he signs this bad boy into law. Watch those rents go up. Keep going up. Keep going up. Thanks for being here. I'll see you on the next episode. Bye for now.